it doesn't make you any less than, it's just one part of the culture itself. And it's a very beautiful part of it, but it's always something that you can learn and pick up, and you are a part of the community regardless. So, okay, well, maybe I shouldn't be sharing, and maybe no one really knows. So like this is kind of embarrassing that like I'm the only one and I stick out
Mm.
like a sore thumb. I think Spanish for me growing up too, it was a little bit of like I would say a love and hate relationship growing up, just because.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of DOCE, the podcast for immigrants by immigrants. I'm your host, Balin, and today I spoke with a colleague, Jonathan Calixto. We both work at Bella Magazine. Jonathan, he is a fashion correspondent, a news reporter, a content creator, an influencer. He does so many things, and he's a huge magnet for people. He has this great energy, and that's exactly why I invited him to the podcast here today. He shared with us about his experience growing up as a first generation American. He has Peruvian parents, and how he came to appreciate more and more his Latin culture and ethnicity as he grew older. He also shared with us what it's like to be a creator and a freelancer. I hope you guys enjoy our conversation, and welcome to the podcast.
I had to tell Brandon to not play GTA this morning because I'm
Is
like, we
he?
don't need the gunshots and everything in the background.
Oh my god, or the screaming.
Yeah, I'm like, please no.
That's so funny. Do you play video games like that?
I played it a few times here and there. Usually growing up, love them. Like Resident Evil, all those type of games, GTA itself. Loved it. Now I'm like, here and there I play it. I like playing the zombie stuff, but not like consistently, no.
That's so funny. I feel like that's one thing I just never expected from you. I don't know why.
That's true. I don't think anyone is like, you're into like shooting games and killing zombies and stuff. I'm like, yeah, it's kind of relaxing sometimes. I don't know.
That's so funny. My dad, he like used to play like at home too. And I would like always like to drive the car because back then I didn't drive any car. So I was like, oh, this is so fun, like driving a car in a
Yeah.
video game.
Oh yeah. Put me on one of those games, the driving cars, I'm so good at. So
So fun. I love that, you were giving us already a little bit of an insight on like growing up playing video games. So I actually wanted to ask you more about that, about how you grew up. I know that I'm not sure, is it one of your parents or both of your parents are from Peru?
both of them.
Okay, so how was it like growing up with Peruvian parents and like growing up in America? How did you make sense of all of that growing up?
Yeah, I think one growing up, being Peruvian and both of my parents, being from Peru, I just from the very young ages I can remember, Spanish and my culture was always around me. And I always like to say it took me a long time though to see it, right? So growing up, I was although I would speak Spanish at home and, translate for my parents and do all those things that we as probably Latinos and, kids who were born here do. I was always a little bit shy about it and not really like interacting with it, just speak about it at home, but then at school and stuff, be a little shy, not really talk that share that I was from Peru or that I was Latino.
Mhm.
But it took me when as I was growing up in later years, I definitely got to see and recognize more of the present. So, whether it was every holiday, cooking the traditional Peruvian meals, or all of our 30 cousins gathering at grandma's house to do Christmas together. Those little things that our culture does, and as Latinos we do, those became more prevalent, and I noticed them a lot more, and I appreciated them a lot more. So, there was never a lack of the language in my household. And growing up, my grandma used to take care of all of our like six cousins while our parents went out to work. So that in itself was also very bonding and something that we all shared growing up with grandma, really, and
Yeah,
her
that's
making
beautiful.
us watch novelas with her when she would pick us up from school. So those experiences and all that, like I'm really grateful for them now because I think they definitely you don't get more culture than with your grandma. Hello. She brings all the culture with her. So it was very special.
That's such a beautiful picture. I was just imagining like you and your family and like 30 people around you. Like that's such a beautiful image. I wanted to ask you about, you mentioned for some time you didn't see it, like it was there, but you didn't see it. What do you think that was contributed to? Like, and did you have that like moment when you were like, I don't know, 15, 14, or whatever age that you were like, oh, this culture has been there the whole time?
Yeah, and I actually thought about that recently too. So that's a great question. I think for me, growing up, it was from the earliest memory I can remember, whether it was like maybe like second or third grade. I remember finally sharing with someone, or just even, when you, as kids, you're sharing like where you're from. And the minute I said Peru, people were like, oh, what part of Mexico is that in?
Oh my God.
Yeah, and it was that ignorance. I'm obviously born and raised in the Bronx, and there's so many diverse people there. But as kids, I guess we just weren't as aware. And so for someone to immediately tell me that response, I think it just closed me off to be like, well, I had somewhat of a pride in my culture, and I knew my parents were very prideful of it. But that was like, okay, well, maybe I shouldn't be sharing, and maybe no one really knows. So like, this is kind of embarrassing that like I'm the only one and I stick out
Mm.
like a sore thumb of being Peruvian. So I was like, nope, like not really gonna share. And so for a while, I kept that kind of to myself. A few of my cousins, we also went to the same school, so we were always like people thought we were Mexican, just because of our complexion and whatnot. So didn't share that for a while. And then it wasn't until I went to high school in the city. And of course, being in the Bronx, it was all about the boroughs. You get your own little perspective, your own little community. But the minute I went to high school in the city, I went all the way downtown and I got to see, like, for the first time, like really in my face, a blend of cultures, whether it was a lot of Latinos, a lot of like African Americans, a lot of like Caucasian people. What made it hard for me my first few years was that I was the only one in my public school in the Bronx that went to that city school. So I was like on my own and like just everything, I was taking everything in, and it was kind of like a culture shock. And that's when I started to ask more questions. That's when I started to like just wonder a little bit more about what it means to be Latino. What does my Spanish Latinidad look like? Being Peruvian, how does that fit into like this culture here? What does that mean as a Peruvian American person? So high school was the starting of the questions, and then I would say college was like where I explored and like really got a better understanding of it.
Okay. Yeah, I feel like that the start of high school makes perfect sense where you're like so many changes are going on and like you add
Literally.
like cultural complexity and all of that. That's so cool that you went to high school in the city. And what you mentioned, like having a little bit of that culture shock, like I never even thought about that because you live in the Bronx and downtown. That's kind of far, isn't it, to go
Oh
to
my
high
God,
school?
yeah. Yeah, and I was all the way by like the so in the Bronx, I lived like second to last stop on the D train. And then in the city, I went all the way down to like by almost where the Twin Towers used to be. So it was like World Trade Center area. So it was like almost about an hour commute. And I don't know why I did it to myself, but it's also one of the best blessings, I think, when I look back now.
Growing up in New York City must be such an experience. I can't even
Yeah.
imagine.
Girl, those train rides are a whole nother thing when you're like on an hour commute and you're passing through like Harlem, then like through Columbus Circle, like Midtown, and just like you're getting a little bit of everything on your way downtown. Yeah.
So when you joined that high school and you saw that like diverse community, how did you fit into it? Like did you mainly stuck with like the Latinos or were you just kind of making your own way, meeting like all kinds of people? How was that for you?
Yeah. Oh my God, I love that because I definitely stuck out. I definitely was my first year in high school. I was bullied and throughout high school, I was really bullied just because at the time I was also figuring out like my identity of like my sexual orientation. I was kind of, like I mentioned, new to this school, didn't know anybody. So I was very shy, very timid. But my first year, it's so crazy that my circle of friends, we were all a little bit of like the outcast, I would say, just because we didn't fit in anywhere really. But my group consisted of a person who was from Mexico. We had someone who was from El Salvador, someone who was Middle Eastern, and it was literally like five of us who would just all of us would just find each other at some point throughout the day and just like hang out together, and travel together. But we were all so like from different like cultures and whatnot, and it made for just connecting in a way where I was like, we don't have to be from the same place in order to like kind of have some ground understanding.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And what role did speaking Spanish like play throughout your life? I'm curious about that.
Yeah, I think Spanish for me growing up too, it was a little bit of like I would say a love and hate relationship growing up, just because one thing that I struggled with was that growing up, because I knew the language, I had to translate for my family from like the very young age of like 12 or 13 when they would take me to an appointment with them, like, and I would have to be that media person, then they would expect me to know all the words that were in English to translate them to Spanish. And so I felt a lot of pressure. And that language, I, didn't really come to understand it or like just grasp it when I was like in high school. And I think since then on, it definitely allowed me to have more of a relationship and value the relationships that I have with my family. So I always say because of the language itself, I get to have like just a deeper connection with like my grandparents, my parents themselves, and understand a little bit more. You know how they say certain words in English don't translate to Spanish or like they have
Yeah.
different meanings? I feel like the same thing just for the language itself. When you can speak it, you just get to interact and have a different type of value and connection to people who speak it as well.
I 100% agree. And obviously, my experience is biased because I've always had Spanish, but it's always very interesting for me to meet people who are so connected to the culture but don't speak the language. And I think there is a lot that they can get out of the culture. But what you're saying is like there is almost like this barrier, this like new world that you enter when you are fully able to express yourself and understand other people and understand
Yeah.
like exactly what they're saying with the words that they're using. I think, yeah, language is so powerful, like of connecting people in that way.
Yeah, and I think sometimes, it takes a little bit of time to sometimes, when you grow up, you might not know it completely. And I think I always understood it, but never in like, spoke it so like often. And although it was around me, it took some time to like definitely learn it and feel more comfortable in it. But I feel like also growing up, sometimes you meet other Latinos who that was their first language or they knew it their whole life. And sometimes you get a little bit judged because you're like, well, I'm Peruvian American. I was born here. I wasn't necessarily born in my country. So it's having to kind of get that confidence back of being like, well, no, I am still Latino. I still speak the language and, I'm still learning how to pronounce certain words and whatnot, but I definitely can communicate and understand you.
I think that's such a great point that you're bringing up the whole like feeling judged because your proficiency might not be as good. What would you say to somebody who's like, who grew up like you, Peruvian American, Mexican American, like Latino American, and they are a bit shy about their Spanish speaking skills? Like, what would you say to them?
Yeah, well, first off, I will let you know that a lot of people now speak Spanglish, so it's totally okay. But I would just say immerse yourself in the culture the way you feel like you could learn it, right? So I know for certain people, maybe it's watching novelas and just kind of like feeling, how the rhythm or the pronunciations go, picking up a book and just trying that for the first time, an audiobook to listen to how people communicate it. But do the deep dive in your culture, see how they, interpret things, how they communicate. And the best resources can be your grandparents, your family members who are from there. Because I would say it doesn't make you any less than, it's just one part of the culture itself. And it's a very beautiful part of it, but it's always something that you can learn and pick up and you are a part of the community regardless. So it just takes your time. But yeah, it's you're a part of it.
That is such a great advice. I 100% agree, especially the way of like, do it however it feels comfortable for you. Like sometimes people ask me, oh, like, how would you recommend I learn Spanish? And first of all, like I think Duolingo is a great tool, but I think that has to be paired up with something that you love. I think learning
Right.
through music, it's such a good way, especially like if you like reggaeton or even just the other genre. Reggaeton is not the
Yeah.
only Spanish genre that we have. And also like watching a Netflix show. I'm always telling people like dive into a Netflix show because if you like the show, you're gonna be hooked and then you're just gonna
Yep.
be inevitably learning it.
Yeah, so it's like even if you don't understand it at first, put the subtitles on, keep reading it, like it'll catch on. And like you said, music I think is another great one, which I didn't mention. Yeah, that is a really, really powerful tour. I'm like, even now hearing like La India and stuff, like growing up, my mom would play it on the
Mhm.
weekends, but like, yeah, but I'm like now it's become so ingrained in like me that I'm like, oh yeah, when I'm like doing certain things, I'll play like La India, Selena, of course. So yeah, there's that definitely contributes to being more culture for sure.
Yeah. Now that you mentioned that, what you were talking about, like almost coming back to your culture in high school and like in college, really diving into it, I think we all, in a way, kind of do that. Like for me, my I also grew up like hearing all these like salsa, cumbia songs when like especially in the weekends when we were cleaning the house. And I think that I was just like, oh, these are just like my mom's songs, whatever. I didn't put much attention to them. And like a few days ago, I was like playing some music and I was playing all these songs, and my mom was like, that's so funny. Like those were all like my jams. And I was like, huh? Because when I was little, I didn't appreciate them. I didn't even like
Yeah.
them, and now like I'm bumping them in my car. So it's in all sorts of ways we always come back to explore, those things that reminds us of our childhood and growing up, and it's just such a cool cycle to watch.
Yeah, and I'm like, even the words hit a little bit more closer to home now. I feel like I'm like, okay, so you were singing about that cheating man. Okay, I get it. Like, I don't know. It's just all these things that I'm like, you get to relate for sure a little bit more and just feel it. And I do agree. I think that that cycle just allows you to connect and appreciate them too. So there is like a little moment when you're listening to it where you can reflect back on them and be like, well, what did they go through and during that time when they were listening to it, or what was
Mhm.
life like when they were playing it on the weekends, what were they thinking, and all these. Yeah, it opens up a lot more questions and dialogue for sure.
Yeah, definitely. So earlier you also mentioned how you used to be a shy kid, which honestly sometimes I feel hard to believe because you're so like outgoing and just kind of like a magnet for people. You have like a great energy and attitude. So I would love for you to maybe give us a short summary of like how you broke out of that shell and how you're such a great connector, because I really do believe that people just kind of gravitate towards you. And if you see that in yourself, like what do you think that has to do with?
Yeah, well, thank you for that, first of all. I think for me growing up, yeah, I was very shy, very timid, and I still am like that's kind of like my first nature. I definitely go back to like I'm a very more introvert person, or I need like to be at home to recharge to then be
Mhm.
out and extrovert and share my energy with people and receive theirs as well. But I would say what helped me a lot was that my second year of high school, I found our theater club on campus, or in high school, and it was called Epic Theater. And that for me unlocked so much about just being able to kind of, if I wasn't owning my confidence at the time, to act like it and to embody someone who did, embodying those different characters. It was kind of
Mhm.
like, okay, I was able to just go into that role and act confident for that 1 hour performance. And then I can go back to my space. But in doing that every night and every year of acting as someone, it just helped me kind of, pick up a little bit of those personality traits to be like, okay, well, if you can do it for an hour, you can totally walk around being confident in like your own skin, like. So that unlocked it. And then in college is where just like it was like, okay, well, if you did it during high school, like you can totally do it in college, being on a campus and just exploring different like student organizations, knowing more about my culture, about my sexual orientation. The moment I started to like understand those parts of myself, and those identities, it was like, okay, like you can totally walk around with a little bit more just appreciation for who you are. And, I think I always say like that self-love is always a everyday kind of work in progress. But I definitely am at a much more better understanding than when I was a young kid, for sure.
Oh wow. Yeah, that's a long journey, but it's so cool that was like prompted by something that you love doing.
Yeah.
That's so awesome. And what quality about you would you say that like brings so many people around you?
Yeah, that's a good one because when I was in college, my first year, well, going into my second year, I became an orientation leader, and we had to take this quiz called like your strengths quest. So everyone could know what they brought to the table, like what were their top five strengths, so we can know how to work as a team. And my number one strength was includer, which basically just means like I like to get everyone involved and included and felt like involved.
Mhm.
And at the time, I was like, well, that's not fun. I was like, I want to be like the voice, the loud one, or like, the powerful one or whatever. But as time went on and through different experiences, I feel like that is my strength. I think one thing that I always make it a point is that everyone does feel seen and heard. And not just because I'm like, oh, well, they just need to be seen and heard. It's because I do feel like everyone brings a perspective that we can all learn from. So I feel like in any room that I'm in, I always try to, yeah, connect people, make them join the conversation in some way because, I'm like, we can learn something from them. They can pick up something from us. And, this industry, especially like you see it, like we're in such a creative space. It's important to have those connections and to build those relationships because you never know who can give you the next opportunity or who can be of resource and a friend that you might need in this industry.
That's that's such a beautiful quality. And I definitely, as you explained, I was like, yeah, that's definitely how I feel around you. Like I feel included, I feel heard. And that is such a unique quality. I've never heard of that in like a personality test. Um, so that's
Yeah, if
really cool.
and I think they offer it. I know in college it was like free to do it. So yeah, it's called like Strengths Quest. But I always when I'm mentoring people or working with people, I always say definitely take some type of like strengths test or assessment, just because I think yeah, it'll put something on your radar that maybe you're not so privy to. But you'll definitely like it. Look, I took it in college my first year, my first summer of college, and almost 10 years or so later, I'm still like picking up on those things and being like, oh wow, they still apply, or like I still kind of hold that near and dear to what I do today.
It's so funny that you said, oh, that you thought at first it was kind of lame.
I
I don't
did.
know if people are ever really happy with the results they get in a personality test, because honestly, I can relate to that. And I don't, I feel like my personality tests are always just kind of like, I don't even know, maybe just that I'm just so focused on the results or like that kind of thing of like driving something, and it's just kind of always being behind the scenes, and I'm like, oh, that's kind of like not fun. But now that I'm doing all these like different endeavors and like photography and like podcasting, it's like, well, yeah, I'm always behind the scenes. It's like that is maybe my strength, but coming to terms with those results is always very interesting.
Yeah, and it's also how you like see it, right? Because I think one thing about you is that because you are so much behind the scenes because of like your profession with the photography and the creative stuff, it's like you have a much more deeper appreciation for the people who are in front of the screen, and therefore you bring a different perspective that we might not always see or hear about. So it's always also I'm like always I'm always like try to find the positive in it, see the other side of it. So yeah, I think you definitely bring a unique perspective to it that is
Oh, thank
appreciated.
you. No, I
Yeah.
appreciate that. And that is also a really good habit. I'm trying to get into that of like seeing the positive. It's not easy sometimes.
No, not at all.
So let's go on to what is your life mantra? What are the words you live by right now?
Yes, good. I haven't hmm. Well, okay, right now, still in 2023, my biggest like word or thing that I'm leaning on is give yourself grace. Right. So I saw someone at the end of 2022 do this thing where they were like, pick a word for the year and just lean into that word. And they were picking grace. And I was like, okay, well, I never thought about that. And so literally throughout all of 2023, my biggest thing that I told myself when I'm in a stress or when I'm just feeling so overwhelmed, I just say, give yourself grace. And I say it to myself. And I think in that moment, obviously it took some time and the more repetition that you do and you practice it, now every time I say it to myself, it does feel like I can breathe a little bit more. And I just feel like, okay, you're right. Nothing is too serious that like you can't take a moment to just give yourself grace, live what you're doing. Like it's okay if you mess up or stumble this time. So I would say give yourself grace is like what I'm leaning into right now.
That's beautiful. What about, have you thought of your word for the upcoming year?
No, I haven't, but I'm gonna be picking it very soon. I'm waiting for closer to New Year's or so. I'm gonna do this thing where I like pick it out of like a little jar or something. But
Okay.
I'm yeah, but I'm gonna I'm gonna leave it up to chance to see what my word for next year will be. Yeah.
I love that. I think now that you're saying that, I really like the idea of picking a word for the year. Grace is a really good one. I think
Yeah.
for me, I think I'm gonna pick courage.
Ooh.
Because we in this creative world, especially, and in the world of freelancing, we need a lot of courage to do all these things that we do and just leaning to what feels right. So I think that's gonna be my
Yeah.
word for this year.
That's a really good word too. Yeah, I like that. So I'm
Thank
gonna
you.
put it in the jar for sure.
Okay. All right, so talk to me about your your career, what you're doing right now. You're like a mega freelancer. I was taking a look at your resume and it's like everything is like year present, year present. I'm just like, oh my God, how do you do it?
I know. I'm like, maybe that's why no one wants to hire me because they're just like, he's working so many things. I don't know. But definitely right now, yeah, I'm leaning into being a freelance. And it's been over the past year or so that I've been freelancing. But yeah, I am a news reporter by day, I like to say. And then through the evenings and my free times, I'm a fashion and lifestyle correspondent. So talking about, queer news, what's trending. And in my news reporter job, I cover a lot more like local, hard news, lifestyle events happening in the Bronx. So a little bit of that. And then I also do a little freelancing as a creator, people have seen it on my Instagram, and then also a host for my own things that I've started, like my own podcast. Yeah, so a little bit of everything, staying less sleep, more work.
Absolutely. And talk to me about your creator and influencing kind of world because you have like a decent follow, like 10,000 plus followers. Like that's so cool. How did that come about? Was that like a goal you had, or did it like just organically grow?
Yeah, I would say definitely organically. When I started off in the industry, my first job was working in PR, and one of my first internships was in public relations. And so through my job, when I was interning and then got a full-time offer, they kind of were like, "Well, we want to place you with like doing the influencer marketing side." And basically, what that meant was that it was a fashion PR. So we worked with a lot of influencers and creators, and I would help them get dressed up for Fashion Week and help them do collaborations with our brand. So if we had a designer that was showing for the first time, they would send us like 20 pieces of clothes and they'd be like, okay, we want influencers to wear to our show. And so my job was like kind of pairing the brand with an influencer. And
Okay.
so yeah, and so building those relationships and seeing some of their experiences. Obviously, I always thought, wow, this is really cool. This is really fun. It was like fashion. Some of them were also hosting and doing things on TV. And so that kind of sparked the idea of like, well, maybe I can build my own side hustle and, be creative in that way and tell my own story. And so through that experience, I started kind of building a little bit more, obviously meeting the creators, them sharing me on their socials, obviously like just allowing me to meet more people, gain a little bit more followers. And then it wasn't until I started working with a magazine as well, with Bella Magazine, that I started doing more editorial stuff and working on fashion things and just being involved in that conversation a little bit more. And so definitely through that as well, gain more viewers and people who were just kind of interested in what I was going to be writing about next. And so as I've been doing that and writing about more things like queer lifestyle, again, another set of audience and people who are interested in that also started kind of coming along and following. And then, of course, my Peruvian side and the Peruvian people and the Latinos in general, again, same thing, started to connect a little bit more. So yeah, it just over the time, it was just more people joined the tribe, and I'm excited. I feel like there's more to obviously do, but I think it's definitely allowed me to have a good, like, a voice and share in my perspective with people.
Yeah, that's so cool. You're so multifaceted. Like with the Bronx News, it's like a whole different set of like it's politics, right? That it revolves around mainly and like
It
news.
is like, yeah, it is like politics, hard news, things that are happening on a very local level. Yeah, so it is different than when you get to go to like a red carpet event.
Right. It's like having all these different kind of personas to switch into. That's so cool. It's like you
Yeah.
get to live so many different lives in one day.
Oh, 100%. Sometimes I'm like, okay, what day is it today? Because we've done a little bit of both too much. But no, yeah, it allows for a fun experience, and I think also a way of telling stories and connecting with people that I didn't quite know before how to do. I feel like I always knew how to do my job in a sense or learn how to do it. But these two as well. Both of these experiences now allow me to kind of have a better understanding and just appreciation of how to connect with people.
Yeah, that's so cool. Let me ask you, what is like the best and worst part of like, yeah, being like a content creator and like an influencer? I'm curious.
Yeah, I would say best part definitely has to be when you work with a brand and you're doing it as a way to also educate them about what it means to be a queer Latino. Like I've had the opportunity, thankfully, with a few of the brands that I've worked with, to literally where they've asked me, in my perspective, what would someone as a queer Latino like to see? You know,
Mhm.
and their work has also been about empowering that community. So I think when I get to have those experiences and those collaborations, where it's not just like they're handing you a campaign sheet and being like, well, you have to do this. It's more like, well, what do you see your people, your audience being interested in, and what can we do to also align there? I think that's the beauty of it and why I've enjoyed like just going into that a little bit more. Um, the bad side of it, I would definitely say, is that sometimes obviously you are undervalued and underpaid. I mean, obviously, I'm not someone with a huge following as a lot of other creators, but I think I also bring a very unique perspective. And so sometimes brands won't want to pay or want to just, do free things because they think, oh, well, it's Pride Month. If we gift you these things, you should want to share them. And it's like, well, no, more than ever, this is why you should be paying queer creators or even for Hispanic Heritage Month, they come and
Yeah.
they're like, well, because you're Latino, you should be privileged to get this campaign. And it's like, well, no,
Oh my
so
God, that's like a terrible place to come from. Like as a
literally.
brand.
Yeah. And I've gotten more empowered now of writing those emails back. Before, when I first started, I was like, well, no, I'm not going to write an email. I'm not going to say nothing. I'll accept it. And now I'm like, if you're reaching out for me for Pride Month, you should be trying to pay queer creators. Like, what are you trying to do? Free work, So, yeah.
Yeah. Oh wow. Yeah, it's a whole different world of like because you're your own brand, so like you have to carry out those negotiations. It takes a lot of courage to go not up against, but to negotiate with these brands who are doing this like every single day. And you are learning how to negotiate with them, and they have like pros doing it. And then you're like, yeah, your one man show is like you're your publisher, your art director, your photographer, your videographer, everything.
Yeah, it definitely is. And I think I've thankfully have like a group of circle of creators that I can sometimes lean into about those questions. Because I think in that conversation too, it is about when these brands reach out, it's okay to ask for a little bit more because you are your own photographer, or if you have to hire a photographer,
Mhm.
that it's also about your like and your likeness. You are your own brand. So if they're going to be using this forever, which I learned that mistake through one of the first collaborations that I did, was that I never charged for like copyright or licensing of the content. So now this brand has my content forever. And they've done it, this was like maybe 5 years ago when I collaborated with this brand. And now they've used it up until today, and we haven't worked together since, Uh, so it's those things that you just pick up along the way, but it's okay to charge for those different things. And especially if they're coming to you for these certain type of activations and campaigns geared for your culture.
Yeah. Have you heard of Clara for Creators?
I have, yeah.
Okay, yeah, because this girl, this I went to I went to that like Dale Tu mixer thing at
Okay.
the Facebook headquarters, and I met this girl who was really diving deep into she really wanted to be like an influencer and content creator. So we were talking about briefly about it. She was like, oh yeah, Clara for Creators. That was like the first thing she said. She's like, it's so good, and like tries to promote transparency for influencers. And it's cool
I
because
love
it gives you
that.
kind of like that basis of, oh, this is what brands are paying for this amount of followers and this amount of work. So
Yeah, which I think is something that has just happened recently too. So I feel like, yeah, it is such a good, it kind of equals the playing field for everyone from the creator side and the brand side as well.
yeah.
So yeah, I love that. I love those resources as well.
So the last question I have for you is, how do you stay connected to your culture? And yeah, how do you connect with people in your culture?
Yeah, I definitely feel like something I've leaned more into is family time and just the conversations with um like my family, my relatives, my parents, just because I think especially over the last few years where I feel like I've just been on the go with career stuff, it's been harder to keep up with them. And I think in these conversations, I get to appreciate my culture a little bit more. I think there's obviously more I could be doing to meet with other Peruanos. And I do interact with a lot of the groups on like social media, which is a nice little like connect. And I've attended a few events, but definitely through my parents, I've been able like recently. I sat down with my dad and we did kind of like this one-on-one interview, which my brother was doing for his class in Lehman for his undergraduate class. But we turned it into like a mini little like doc where we were interviewing my dad and asking him these questions. And I think through those conversations, it just allows me to appreciate a little bit more, understand where they came from, and also kind of save these little memories, because obviously like our parents won't be here forever, and I want to be able to hopefully show that to like my kids and their kids. So.
Yeah. Also, you guys recorded video and everything for this?
Yeah, we did. It was like it's like very raw because it's like, he was just at home. It was no studio set up or nothing, but it definitely began the conversations of like what it is to be an immigrant in this country.
Mm.
What his life was like. Obviously, he went through some health issues and, being a Latino and going through health issues here, what did that mean? So all those different things. Yeah.
What was one of the most surprising things you discovered or like rediscovered in that conversation?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things which I'm always shocked about when I speak to my dad about is his immigrating story to the US.
Mhm.
I think obviously everyone has their own journey and stuff, but when my dad did it, it was like late 80s, early 90s. It was just so different. And every time that I speak to him or that we touch about that topic, there's always more about his experience of the
Mhm.
people that he met along the way. And we went to Los Angeles about a year ago or two, and when I tell you like, so when my dad obviously immigrated into this country, he was in Los Angeles for like a little while before, like literally just a few hours before he came to New York. And we sat at a Denny's, which he had never been to, which is so like, whatever. But we sat at a Denny's and literally we were sitting by the window and he looked out the window and he was like, this looks so familiar to me. Like I remember walking this. And my dad hasn't been to Los Angeles since he immigrated into this country.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, and so to have those moments, and even in the interview, it kind of came up too, is just it's so surreal to me how that those moments, even though they might have been hours or whatnot at certain locations, they will just be ingrained in his memory forever, you know? And so, I'm just trying to get more of those things just documented because again, he can tell me these stories, but I feel like I'll forget all those little details. And I just want to never forget it and always honor it as well.
That's so beautiful. And I agree. My actual immigration story here is like nothing. Like I came on a plane, and that's like a very comfortable way of like arriving here. There's not that much like, I got on a plane, I got here, and that's just kind of it. But what you're saying about those little details, or like I'll never forget the date. Like I know the exact
Yeah.
date. I know like what the day felt like. It's just
Wow.
uh, yeah, it is like a forever ingrained memory because it's just so. At the time, I didn't know what it really meant because I was young. But like later on, it's like your brain is almost like preparing to save this memory because it's like, oh,
Mm,
you're gonna want to know this. So it is really cool how I don't know memory works and how certain small
yeah.
moments are just forever in your brain.
Yeah, 100%. I agree with that.
All right, Jonathan. Well, thank you so much for everything that you shared with us today. It was so fun to have you on the podcast. And I just always love talking to you.
Yeah, no, thank you so much again. I think this is just a great opportunity that we were able to just connect on a different level. And I love learning more about, your culture as well, your experiences. So thank you for having me as well. And congratulations on your podcast.
Thank you so much. I hope you have a wonderful Friday, and I'm sure I'm going to see you very soon.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you, Valentina. Have a good one.
Thank you everybody for being here today. Follow us on TikTok and YouTube at DOCE Podcast and wherever you get your podcasts.